Hello, I'm Mark Rees, and welcome to my curious Ghosts and Folklore podcast, where in each episode I investigate a different, weird, and wonderful subject. Except for this episode, that is, because I'll be joined by a special guest who is going to do the hard work for me. And we'll be looking at the art of storytelling, and we'll be focusing on one particularly famous, maybe that should be infamous, eerie Welsh folktale involving skeletons and a tragic love story and a giant spooky tree. And, well, I won't spoil the ending for you, but the tale of Rhys and Meinir, as you've never heard it before, will be coming up later on this podcast. Now, very shortly, via the magic of the internet, I am going to be dialing in to my good friend, Mr. Owen Staton, who is, as you might have guessed by now, a storyteller, one of the finest storytellers in Wales, in the world. And not only will he be telling us that wonderfully creepy story in his own personal way, but we'll also be chatting about exactly what it means to be a storyteller nowadays, because this is an ancient art. We can trace it back through the centuries, people sitting around campfires at night telling each other stories, and we can bring it right up to the modern day where people like Owen are keeping that tradition alive. And while you might be thinking, well, telling stories, that's what all of us do. I tell stories, you tell stories. That is not the same as what the professionals do, again, as Owen will explain to you. And I tell stories on this podcast, but I do not tell stories in the way Owen does. I'm just some bloke with a microphone, a journalist and an author talking about my research. But I am not magically whisking you away to different times and places as the professionals do. And I know there are some people out there who do think that if you are recording a podcast like this, a podcast about spooky, creepy, weird things, then you should be hamming things up in a way, a bit like a horror host would, and you should be all mysterious and whispery and welcome to my podcast. And I don't bother with all that because it sounds a bit naff, for want of a better swear word, and I don't swear in this podcast, so I won't. But I personally think it sounds a bit rubbish. And, you know, I could do that if I wanted to. I could start every episode with funny whispering and cheesy, spooky music in the background. And just to prove that I could, here's an experiment. Hello, and welcome to my curious podcast, where, in this episode, I will be talking like a heavy breather. And it's starting to hurt, so I have to stop. Yeah, see, I won't inflict that on anyone. I think going forward, I'll just stick to being my charismatic self. And I think that's probably a good time for me to shut up and to get Owen on the line and to talk storytelling. So this is my first ever attempt at having a special guest on this podcast. So please bear with me a little bit on this one. If there are any sound issues or technical gremlins or anything that crop up, I apologize in advance. I will live and learn from doing this, I guess, and I'm sure by the time we get our second special guest on here, things will be sounding even better. But for now, it's lucky Owen is my good friend, because he's also my guinea pig, in a way, by being my very first special guest. So let's do this. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Owen Staton.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark. It's good to be here.
Owen, it's amazing to finally have you on the show. You should have been here for the first episode, really. We've done so many things together. But how are things with you right now?
Things are absolutely great, Mark. I know it's been difficult times for everybody, hasn't it? But it's given me a time at least to sit back and sort of and think about what we're doing and sort of think of many ideas. There's been a lot of time that I've been stuck at home like everybody else. And at least I've had a time to do some writing and think of some new stories. So it's making the best of a bad time, I believe. And yeah, things are okay.
Excellent. And these stories you're going to share with the world soon, or are you just sitting there for your own amusement?
A bit of both, probably. I mean, I do write a lot of stories, but whether they get shared is another thing, isn't it? It all depends on how good it is and what sort of audience reaction it gets, really. And sometimes I'll think of an idea that doesn't get to become a story to be told, if you like, but will just stay in a book, sort of a ghostly tale, if you like, locked away to be discovered one day, perhaps, and for someone to look at it and go, well, that's all rubbish, but there we are.
But somebody at some point is going to be blowing dust off this ancient tome, and as they open the front page, it'll have Owen Staton was here.
That's right.
Written on it. I don't know what it'll...
Yeah, people will try and find out who I was then. It'll be like one of these untold mysteries that goes back years.
Now, I mentioned that you're a storyteller, which is a slightly vague term, really. Can you explain, in your own words, what it is exactly you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, well, it's probably about 20 years now, Mark. I've worked as a performance storyteller alongside my day job. But I started off many years ago when I worked in Swansea Museum. And I used to talk about Roman life and Celtic life. And people would come to the museum and visit. And I would talk a little bit about what they used to eat, what they used to wear, where they lived, etc. But these were big sessions that went on for ages. So I had to pepper them with a bit of storytelling, telling Roman and Celtic myths. And it went really well. And from there, really, I started doing more performance stories. I always came up with an idea of maybe a book and creating mythologies for certain areas. And I worked in the Swansea Valley for many years in my day job. And while I was up there, it was an amazing place full of stories and full of ghostly tales and things like that. And I developed a love for storytelling, always being a bit of a frustrated actor, really. But because I could only perform on my own a lot of the time because I wasn't in a group, I just started telling tales and it seemed to work. And yeah, I recorded a CD and it went from there. And I've been all over the world. I've been to the Edinburgh Fringe a couple of times and written my own shows. And it's all about basically telling a tale, but doing it in a way that is entertaining, playing the characters myself, using lots of different voices, using my body to interpret those characters, if you like. It's hard to do on the audio format, of course. But just doing that and telling tales and making sure these old tales are being heard by a new audience as well.
So it sounds to me, because you mentioned Swansea a few times there, Swansea Museum and the valleys themselves. So in a way, did these places inspire that love of storytelling in you, or was it there beforehand? And
I think it was always there, Mark. And as a young child, I can remember being captivated by the films, and these are going back sort of years, but the old Ray Harryhausen films and the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Clash of the Titans, The Land of Time Forgot, all those type of films. I got really into sort of fantasy and stories and monsters and creatures when I was younger, and that always held an interest for me. And I can remember one day in the Swansea Valley, I think the Swansea Valley is one of the hidden gems in Wales, at least, and probably the UK. There's a mountain there called the Cribbarth, and the Cribbarth mountain, from a distance, they call it the Sleeping Giant, and it looks like a man laying on his back. And once you look at that and you see it, you can never unsee it. And I've been all over the world, on holidays and performing, and, I've seen programs and read books from all over the world. And if that was anywhere else in the world, people would be going absolutely nuts for it. But here, we don't promote that enough, I don't think. I mean, I'd urge any of the listeners to just Google the Sleeping Giant, the Cribbarth, and look at it. It's a phenomenal mountain. It's a phenomenal landmark. And yet, not many people know about things like that. So I've always tried to promote things in the area or in Wales in general, just through my storytelling.
I found that on Twitter where, you might just pop to town or something and take a photo of a statue and just put it out there. And people go absolutely mad over this thing, which is very common to us. We walk past it all the time, but people elsewhere in the world are quite fascinated by what we take for granted in a way, and vice versa, I guess, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here in Wales, I think it's part of our culture, isn't it? We don't like to boast. We don't like to shout on the rooftop. And there are so many things that we walk past on a daily basis. Like I said, the people across the world would be going absolutely nuts for, but we just seem to take for granted.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that we do promote these things, and especially in times like they are now, where we need all the interest and support in our communities and people to get involved in things again. And for me, the Sleeping Giant was a big, quite ironically, it was a big wake-up call. But
Yes.
when I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, and I can remember looking at it and thinking, that's just amazing.
Yeah.
Why aren't we talking about this? But there we go.
Well, we are now, so I'm sure the millions of people who tune into this are going to be spreading the word everywhere now. And it's a shame you're not still at the museum, because a few weeks ago I did an episode on the Swansea Devil, which, as I'm sure you know now, has a new home and is in the museum. And you could have been working side by side with the Swansea Devil himself.
Oh, yeah. It's quite... we're going back in the late 90s when I was there. And literally, I didn't work there. I was sort of employed to come in, and I worked for basically a storytelling or educational theatre and education company at the time. But I remember it was a weird place, because I don't know if you know, but I'm like I've got this weird sort of phobia that I'm terrified of taxidermy, and that museum was full of it. So it was always really challenging to work there.
Yeah.
But also, one of my great heroes growing up was Edgar Evans, who was with Scott at the South Pole, Scott of the Antarctic. Just sitting behind me now is a photograph of Edgar Evans. And in that museum, they've got a pair of Edgar Evans's boots. And how fascinated I used to be. I can remember I'd be like dressed as a Roman soldier, and whenever I didn't have an audience, I'd go over and look at Edgar Evans's boots, and just be, he wore those boots. And I'd be fascinated by it. It was incredible, really. A lovely place to work. And what a great atmosphere. And I know that in the visitor book there's a great quote from Dylan Thomas, and it's often open on that page in the museum, but it says, this museum belongs in a museum, which I think is great,
Yeah.
And it does, but in a really good way. And I think, again, a brilliantly atmospheric place that more people should visit when it's open, of course.
Yes, and another nice reference to another episode I did quite recently, a Dylan Thomas episode. So we're going to tick off this whole list of previous episodes at this rate. But you never sneaked on the boots while you're in the museum, though?
No, they were always in a case, otherwise I would have. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Big feet, yeah.
So, and weirdly, again, we are talking about Swansea Museum. And the last event I did before the world fell apart, back when we could do events, was in Swansea Museum myself. And we've done loads of events together over the years, doing our sort of, you doing your storytelling and me doing my boring book person stuff. And what are your memories of those events? Do you enjoy sort of getting together with similar people and talking ghost stories?
Oh, yeah, great. They've always been lovely events, Mark. They were, it's great, over the years that we've done them. I know there's only been a few, really, but over the years, it's nice to see the audience build and the same sort of people come back, expecting things to happen, and people to enjoy them, just because they were so ad hoc when you first put them together. It was just myself, there were a couple of dancers, wasn't there? People from the Paranormal Wales would speak, and but what a great hour, 2 hours they've always been, and just to show how many like-minded people who are out there with an interest in ghosts and folklore and storytelling, really, has always been really nice, and I've enjoyed every one that we've done. They've been great.
The only downside is, you mentioned there about, you get the same people coming back, which is amazing, but you can't use the same stories twice then. So you have to come up with new things for each one, but it gets me every time.
The perils of being a storyteller, really, is that you sort of build up an audience who tend to come, back to see you quite often, and you're always having to come up with new material. So, yeah, it sort of does help push you, though, doesn't it, to create new stuff, tell new stories, and in your case, write more books.
Yes. And I know you've got some stories up your sleeve, which nobody, I don't think, is going to be aware of, and they are your personal ghost stories, which I think I'm right in saying these are not on the internet anywhere, are they? Is this an exclusive?
Yeah, I would not. I wouldn't even call them ghost stories, because what I get frustrated about ghost stories, as you probably know as well, that most ghost stories tend to be, I was walking down the corridor and I saw this figure, and that's it. It's more of a happening, isn't it? More of a sighting. Whereas when I do the storytelling, they tend to be, I look for tales, I look for reasons and characters and this type of thing. There have been a couple of happenings in my life which are unexplained, shall we put it. And there was one sort of fairly recently, which I'll tell you about, and that was, I was in the, funny enough, going back to the museum again, but I was in the Dylan Thomas Theatre, which is just around the corner from Swansea Museum, where over the last couple of years I've been lucky enough to direct a couple of plays. And one of the plays I was quite ironically sort of directing was The Ghost Train, by Arnold Ridley, which is a comedy sort of ghost spoof, isn't it? And from the 1930s, which is a very, very good play, very funny play. And I was having a whale of a time sort of directing this play. And whilst being there, my young son had come to watch this session. And I was directing, the actors were on stage, and I was sort of stood in the auditorium. And in my hand, I had, I've got a little director's book, which is a little notebook, which is, I put all my notes in to give the actors and any sort of things that come to mind when the play is sort of being performed. And I was stood in the aisleway there, on the gangplank, if you like, which is where the seats are. And my son had been sat next to me, and I was watching the actors perform. And then suddenly I had the book in my left hand, which was next to the seats. And I felt something pull the book. And then the book sort of opened in my hand, so it fell open. And I looked up because I was sort of engrossed with what the actors were doing. And then I turned around to sort of tell Ellis to stop doing that, but there was nobody there. And the pull on the book was quite forceful. It wasn't just like the book had opened. The book was actually pulled in my hand. And which was really unusual and really sort of, it made me sit back and think, well, that's really strange.
Yeah.
And during my life, I know that's, to the listeners, that doesn't sound very interesting, and it's not what I would call a story, and it's not what I would perform. But thinking back on it, it was very unusual. And there's a couple of times in my life, in the room where I'm sat now many years ago, I can remember being in the bathroom, which is in the middle of the day, which is right next to where I am now. And I walked out the bathroom, and out the corner of my eye, I saw a figure move from the main bedroom into the room I'm sat in now. And I just turned and thought, well, what was that? And I think the amazing thing about sort of, if you can call them paranormal encounters, I don't know, is that I never went out looking for that. I didn't search for it. I certainly didn't expect it. And it didn't frighten me in any way, or it made me sit back and think, well, that was weird. But it was not until I sort of reflected on it that I thought, well, that's really odd. But if you actually sat here now and said to me, well, do you believe in ghosts? I'll say, well, I don't know, really. I really don't know. But I have had a few things which quite unexpectedly, and as I said, totally unlooked for, and there are loads of listeners out there who could say similar things that just happened, just off the cuff, that sort of flummoxed me, really, and have made me think, well, yeah, I can't really explain that. That was quite strange.
And I think you've been slightly unfair when you say, that might not sound that interesting. I think they're very interesting because they're real. So you're not talking about dragons fighting in the Mabinogion. You're talking literally a book being pulled out of your hand or whatever it was, and some figure walking around your house. Now, there are people who would find that.
Yeah, that's scary.
Or maybe when I put it that way. Yeah. And so do you have any sort of opinions? And I mean, you say you don't know if you believe in ghosts or not. If you were put on the spot and said, well, what is it then? What would you say?
I don't know, Mark. I really don't know. I often, sometimes, maybe even talk myself out of it. I can remember with when I say a figure, it was literally when you see something out the corner of your eye for a second, and you almost, your brain doesn't even register it. Well, it registers it, but you don't see it clearly. It was just a movement rather than a figure, but at sort of, a small, almost childlike height, which makes it even more spooky. Yeah. But my house is a new house, new build. Well, it was, I've been the only people who've lived here. And so there is that. And the pulling of the book, I just don't know what, like I say, I'd like to think it's a ghost. I would like to think it's a ghost because I would like to believe in ghosts because I like mysteries and I like unexplained things. And as a person, I really like, but I don't know. Was it a ghost or not? Was it? When I say it could have been my imagination, but I think that's odd because sometimes if you're in a dark room and you're sat alone and you hear noises, then your imagination is piqued. But when I'm concentrating on something totally different that's going on ahead, which is the actors performing on the stage, and then that happens to me uncalled for, totally out of the blue, it leaves it hard to explain, Mark. But as I said, I don't know. I would like to believe in ghosts, but I don't know is my honest, inconclusive, and on the fence answer.
Oh, I can't say anything because I am exactly the same. I do the politician's answer where you don't say yes, you don't say no. You just hold your hands up and say, look, I God knows, I don't know. And maybe one day we will. Maybe if we keep doing podcasts like this, we'll find out some answers. I don't know.
Well, sorry, I'll throw it back. I know I'm the guest, not a host here, Matt, but you're someone who writes about ghosts. You're someone who researches ghosts. You're someone who spends a lot of time to look into archives and reading old stories. What about yourself? Have you got anything that's really made you sit up and think, whoa, or has anything happened to you? Because you've been in situations, like I said, I've never gone looking for it. I don't go with paranormal groups. I don't go to haunted locations expecting to see something. Yeah. But has anything happened to you that you want to share?
That's a very crafty way of turning the tables on me, but But I've spent a lot of time I've spent too much time probably in supposedly haunted places. Part of it I can justify as my job. I've been there as a journalist, or I've been as an author writing about these places. But I've also wasted a lot of my own spare time as well because I enjoy it. And more often than not, it's quite nothing eventful happens. But it's always fun. I think even if nothing weird happens, it's fun just being there with a group of friends, running around in the dark. On the rare occasions where things do happen, that adds to it. But I have never seen anything, I would say, yes, that is definitely paranormal. But I have seen some weird old things over the years.
Yeah, very good.
Any more questions, interviewer? Or should we switch back?
I'll sit back. But no, thanks. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. I think there's been a couple of occasions where I've spoken to people who are more into this sort of like yourself, paranormal groups, etc. And I think I have a theory. My theory is the more you look for these things, the less likely perhaps you are to see them. And just when things happen, as I said, in really, when I say mundane locations, but just where you don't expect it and you don't think it's happening and you're not looking for it, that's when these stories tend to happen, don't they? And probably when you look back through the stories that you put in your books, a lot of them tend to be when someone's just walking down the street or someone is speaking to somebody or these things happen. They're not actually looking for these things to happen, they just do. And that is the interesting part, I think. And that's maybe the key. They say, I do, believe it or not, I do a bit of running. And people say that the key to running is not thinking about running. So I think the key to ghost hunting is not thinking about ghosts, just letting them happen to you, perhaps. I don't know. I'm no expert. I don't even know if I believe in them. But there we are. That's been my sort of experience, if you like. Over the years.
The first rule of ghost hunting is don't talk about ghost hunting or don't mention ghost hunting, whichever one it is. I remember, you saying that Cymru Paranormal, good friends of ours, the ghost hunting group in Wales, and they always say that if you're going to go and investigate ghosts, you need to recreate the conditions that ghosts have been seen in the past by other people. And if somebody sees a ghost at 2:30 in the afternoon in the kitchen on a summer's day, you should be there at 2:30 on recreating exactly the same. You shouldn't be walking around at 3:00 in the night with a torch and a shaky video camera because that's not when people have seen these things, and it's pretty much what you were saying there, isn't it? They just pop up.
Yeah, I think as well, in those situations and in those, when you create an atmosphere like that, and like yourself, you've enjoyed many times when you've gone to a haunted castle or a haunted house, and you've gone around there and sort of been actively out there looking for ghosts. And that's great fun. And you're with like-minded people, and it's a really enjoyable experience. Yeah. But the chances of you actually having that full-on ghost encounter are probably really rather slim. But then people come back with really compelling ghost stories that happen when they least expect them, and that's what I find interesting, really interesting.
Now I know we've spoken about the real ghost stories or the sort of real happenings, but I know you've also got a bit of folklore to share with us. Is it fair to call it folklore? It's a ghost story, isn't it? But a folkloric ghost story.
It's folkloric as it gets, really. Basically a short story that's very famous in Wales, but one that we could you could listen to, and maybe we could I could just give a taste of what as a storyteller I do when I perform, really. So do you want to sort of give a bit of background about the story that you're going to tell? Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do is I will just I will tell the listeners, basically. There's nothing mystical here, Mark, but I find that in this day and age, it's very difficult to get people's attention when they're looking at their phones. There's so many things happening in life. We're all leading such busy lives. So I started, when I perform a story, to try and create an atmosphere, and I'll do that right now. Mm-hmm. And that is to tell people about how storytelling used to be and what we should look at. And maybe it sort of ties in with ghost stories, really, is that stories were traditionally told at a time called the time between times, which is the time it is neither night nor day, but the sun has gone and the sky is grey. The time between times is this time that people see lights in the sky. It's a time that people see ghosts, and it's a time that people see fairies. So let's leave our modern world, and let's just sit back, listen, and no matter where you are, you could be sat in your car, in your living room, on your way to work, listening to this on your headphones. Just imagine that it's the time between times, that we are sat at the fireplace. The sky is grey. And although we can hear the howl of wolves, we can hear the growl of bears, we know that we are safe at the time between times. Now, for this story, I'm going to take you to a place in North Wales. Far from here, but actually quite close in the grand scheme of things. A place called Nant Gwrtheyrn, on the coast in North Wales, a wind-swept village, which is now a Welsh language research centre. But many, many years ago, it holds a grim and fascinating story. During the reign of the great King Henry VIII, where Thomas Cromwell dissolved the monasteries, the old church and abbey there was torn down. And as the monks were being pulled away and taken away from the place they had lived for many years, one of them turned to the village folk, who had not helped them when Henry's soldiers came a-calling, and had put a curse upon the village that no children would ever be born there. And for many years this curse held true. But not long after, a young couple called Rhys and Meinir, who both lived in the village from when they were children, met and fell in love in the beautiful surroundings of Nant Gwrtheyrn. Now, high above the village, atop the cliff face overlooking the sea, is an old oak that's as old as the mountains and as capricious as the sea. It looks like a hooked hand, a clawed hand, overlooking the rocks. And Rhys and Meinir would meet there and sit hand in hand, overlooking the village. For many years they courted, and finally they got permission to marry from both their families. And all of the village in Nant Gwrtheyrn was looking forward to the great wedding that would happen. Sat by the old hollow oak, Rhys arranged to meet Meinir on the day before their wedding. He had for her a surprise. As he could see her crossing a winding path that led up to the old oak, he brought out his knife and carved on the oak the initials in a heart of both him and his lover. Meinir made her way there, and he unveiled it by moving away the heart with Rhys loves Meinir written on the tree. Her reaction was quite unexpected. He thought that she would be happy. He thought that her heart would be filled with joy, but no. She started to cry and said to Rhys, "You know about the curse. What you have done here is angered them, angered those who have cursed us. How can you say that we are lovers before we are married? You should not have put that heart on the tree." Rhys was quite taken aback, but tried to stop her, and in the end they just embraced as she cried. And then in their hearts they looked forward to the next day. It was a great tradition in those times in Wales that when people were to be married, just before the ceremony, the bride in her bridal gown would run away and hide, and then the groom and the groomsmen would spend the time trying to find her and bring her back to the church so the wedding could take place. And everyone would enjoy this festivity, and that this was nothing different. On the steps of the old church there they met, and Meinir looked at Rhys, winked at him, and ran off to hide. The groomsmen counted to 100. It was a bright sunny day, and everyone was happy. The village was decked out with garlands of flowers, and the tide could be heard washing on the shore far away. Finally, They reached the Count, and Rhys and his men started to look for Meinir. They looked down by the beach. They looked in her house. They looked in the small hall. They looked near the blacksmith shop, but could not find her. Rhys started to grow worried and carried on looking for her. His groomsmen carried on, riding further out into the farms, into the countryside, into the trees following. But as the time between times came, the time when it was neither night nor day, but the sun had gone and the sky was grey, Meinir could not be found. Rhys grew very worried, as did Meinir's family, and they spent all night shouting, "Meinir, Meinir," from the cliff tops, looking for her everywhere. But she could not be found. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, and the months turned to years. And everyone involved had drifted away. Nobody knew where Meinir went, but all believed that maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she had run away with another lover. But Rhys did not lose hope. And he wandered the cliff tops, wandered the forests, wandered the beaches, calling out Meinir's name until the shoes rotted from his feet and his clothes tore, his beard grew long. But still he searched and searched, till one day, as the sky grew grey, he made his way to the old oak and sat down and ran his fingers over the old moss-covered carving, "Rhys loves Meinir," which was carved upon the tree. He started to weep, and as the night grew long, a storm came in from the sea. First it started to rain, until the rain was so heavy that it beat like thunder. And then the thunder started, so loud it felt like the gods were banging drums in the sky. Then the lightning started, lighting the sky so bright that it was almost like day. And Rhys still sat there by the tree. Finally, at midnight, directly as the clock struck 12, a lightning bolt shot from the sky and hit the old oak tree and crushed it asunder. It lit into fire and split apart. And there, in the hollow of the old tree, Rhys turned around, by the firelight, saw the skeleton of Meinir, dressed in her wedding dress, trapped in the centre of the old oak. She must have ran in there on the day of the wedding to hide, thinking Rhys would go there first. But he had not. And as she clambered within, she must have called and called, yet nobody found her, till eventually she died, and the curse carried on. And it is said now that in Nant Gwrtheyrn, at the time between times, where the stump of the old oak is still there, if you look up at the oak from the village, many people have seen the ghost of Rhys as he wanders the cliff face, looking for his wife who never was, Meinir, both of them victims of the curse of Nant Gwrtheyrn. And that, my friends, is the end of that story. Thank you very much, Mark.
I feel like I should... Well, I will clap. Let's have a round of applause down the microphone. And if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, nothing will. And what... I mean, this does very neatly lead up to my next question, but one of the amazing things with that is that even though this is a podcast, I'm watching you right now. I can see you on video. Sadly, nobody listening to this can, but it is... You're so animated doing it that as it happens, you do have a video channel out there, which I was going to ask you about. So in theory, people, they can take my word for it that it is well worth watching you as well as listening to you. Do you want to tell us a bit about that YouTube channel?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mark. One of the things that's happened in lockdown, obviously, we haven't been able to go out as much, and performances have been next to nothing. So I was just sitting here a little while ago, and I thought, wouldn't it be good to actually try and commit some of these stories to video? So I actually did just start a little channel. If you Google or you type into YouTube, Owen Staton or Time Between Times, you will find a number of my stories. And literally all it is basically what you can see now, which is me sitting in a chair, actually telling the stories. I do a different one every week. I try to upload them on a Sunday. And I would love for any of your listeners, if they want to hitch on and join me on that channel, I'm more than happy to take requests. I'm more than happy to look for other tales, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So I'd love to see some of the Ghosts of Wales listeners pop over and visit me there. And also, I do quite a lot on Twitter, which is a medium that I use a lot, not just for storytelling. I'd like to tweet about just about anything that I come across in my life. And if they look for me on Twitter, I'd be love to have them on board as followers. And I'd like to interact with anyone who has got any questions there as well. That would be great.
Well, what I'll do, Owen, because when I upload this, I'll include a direct link as well to your videos on my website. So if anyone listening does need help, I mean, it's quite easy to find you, isn't it, on search engines? Yeah. But if you need help, I'll put the link up as well. And I mean, you mentioned there, if people listening to my podcast, I think if they like listening to me talk about ghosts and folklore, then they're going to love you, because you do it professionally rather than me waffling on, don't you? So that's a great thing as well. So I'm sure they'll be flocking to see you.
It's just a different thing, Mark, isn't it? I mean, as I said before, I think the key to ghost stories is finding these tales that have got a bit of substance. And a lot of my tales aren't ghost stories. They are stories about the Tylwyth Teg, the Mari Lwyd, stories about Welsh folklore, Gelert, the Two Dragons, Vortigern's Kingdom, all these old Welsh stories. A lot of them are those type of things as well. Yeah. So anyone who's got interest in folklore in particular, I'd love to see there. And anyone who's, as I say, have got any ideas of stories that I haven't heard or they'd like to hear told, that would be fantastic.
Well, see, you keep setting me up without knowing what you're doing at the moment. However, that sets me up nicely to my next bit. But you mentioned the Mari Lwyd. And when I launched this podcast, I actually thought that, look, the Mari Lwyd is such a huge, huge thing in Welsh folklore. It should be the first one, but at the same time, it's a Christmas time tradition and doesn't pop up until the new year. So I've been sitting here every week going, Mari Lwyd, no, wait. So maybe at Christmas time, we should get together and do some kind of Mari Lwyd special, which leads very nicely into the little surprise announcement we have, which is we are hoping to actually team up and do a proper podcast together going forward, aren't we? If it all works out,
that would be fantastic. Again, it'd be nice to go out on location, wouldn't it? And maybe tell stories and look at things where ghosts have been seen exactly, and do a bit of research and find out more about the area and the stories of the area as well. And I'm sure some of the listeners would be interested. Well, I hope so anyway. And it's something I'm looking forward to very much.
Well, people can hold us to it now, because in the past it was just me and you talking rubbish, but now it's out there in the world. People are going to come up to us in the street and go, "Hey, where's this podcast you promised us?" So we have to make it happen now. So
that's right. You've committed it to the internet. Now it's there forever, isn't
it? Yes. So look into the future then, Owen. Anything else you want to mention? Anything exciting going on?
Well, at the moment, as I say, I'm just waiting for the time we can start performing again. I mean, if people are listening to this now in August 2020, but things are quite tight at the moment and quite hard. So I'm just hoping everyone's okay. I'm hoping that these sort of things, bring a little bit of joy into people's lives anyway, and people with an interest in this type of thing. But I would certainly like to, as I say, get out there more and visit some other locations and document some of the lesser known tales so that we can bring to this audience. And I think that is something I'd really like to do in the future and something I can really look forward to. And of course, Mark, where you could really help me out is I've always wanted to write a book. I've always wanted a book.
Yes.
I've got a few ideas and fictions in my mind, but maybe you could help me out with some knowledge there. That would be great.
Well, if you keep helping me out with podcasts, I'll help you out with a book. And then teamwork. And again, you've committed yourself to this as well now. This again is out in the world, so it has to happen. And I also hope, I mean, you mentioned there this is going out in August 2020. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody out there in August 2021 is playing catch-up and listening back to last year's podcasts and is wondering what all the fuss was about? Things have some kind of normality again.
Yeah, that would be brilliant, isn't it? Or if people were looking back at this in 2051 and looking at it and listening to it, wow, what are they talking about? Because I never thought I'd live to see days like this, and you must be the same. I never in a million years thought that we'd be living the lives we live in at the moment, months after everything that's gone on. And it certainly has been an interesting time, hasn't it?
Yes. 2051, they'll be living underwater and things, and actually, that's a busted song, isn't it? I never, of all the people, I never thought I'd be quoted on this podcast.
Yeah.
Or McFly, it's one of those bands.
Or McBusted.
McBusted, that's a McBusted song. Which is probably a good time to wrap things up, really, isn't it? If we're veering off into 90s pop or 2000, whenever it was, pop. So thank you very much, Owen. It's been amazing to have you on the podcast, and you're going to have to come back very soon.
It'd be an absolute pleasure, Mark. It's been great to chat to you again. I haven't seen you for a little while, and how much I've really enjoyed the episodes you've put out as well. And I'd love to come back on. Anytime, just give me a shout. I'll be there.
You keep the compliments coming, and we'll keep you on the show. Thanks, Owen.
No problem. Thank you.
And now we return to normality. That really does hurt. Yes, now we are back to normal. Owen has gone. It's just me sitting here on my own, talking to you down a microphone. And how amazing was Owen? I mean, I've known Owen some time now, and I've heard many of these stories, and they still amaze me whenever I get the opportunity to listen to them again. As he mentioned, he is recording them and uploading them onto YouTube. So if you'd like to go and check them out, and why wouldn't you, then you can track Owen down on YouTube, and it's all free. It won't cost you a penny, so go and have a listen. And that leads me, I guess, to the usual point in the show where I like to ask what you think about what has been quite a packed episode, really. We've spoken about storytelling. Are you a storyteller? Do you agree with Owen? What do you think about the future of the art, especially at the moment with the way the world is? Are you finding things more difficult, or weirdly, could things like social distancing actually make storytelling more appealing? Because it is, for the most part, a solitary act. It's just you. You don't have to worry so much about interacting with other people. So could this possibly be a time to embrace storytelling when other art forms are much more difficult to put on? I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out there. But as usual, get in touch. Let me know what you think. I'm on all the main social media channels. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Track me down, search for Mark Rees, put the word ghosts in or the word folklore, and I'll pop up on top. And we can chat about storytelling. We can also chat about Rhys and Meinir. And one of the things I particularly love about Owen's version is that I am quite familiar with that story. And then when I listen to Owen tell it, I pick up new little details each time. Maybe that's the same for you. Maybe you've never heard it before and now you're too scared to go near a tree or to get married. I don't know. But as always, please get in touch. And of course, there's the obligatory shout out that if you have enjoyed this episode, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It's great for you because you never miss an episode ever. And it's great for me because I know people appreciate this podcast and are listening and are tuning in, and it's worth doing more. So anything you can do, subscribe, press the like button, leave a nice review, tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. That would be very, very much appreciated. All of which leaves me to say that I've got a special surprise up my sleeve this week because I'll be uploading not one, but 2 episodes. I've got a special bonus episode going up this week. If you do subscribe, as mentioned there, you'll know exactly when. And this is a particularly good episode. It's one of my favourite haunted places on the planet. And it's being released for a special reason. You'll find out why when it pops up. So keep an eye out because there is going to be 2 episodes this week, not just the one. Buy one, get one free, even though you don't buy it, even though it's free anyway. So buy none, get 2 free. Does that make sense? By none get to... I don't know. It's reached that point now where we are right at the end of the episode and I am waffling nonsense again. So I am going to shut up. I am going to say thank you very much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn. I hope you've enjoyed this first attempt at getting a guest on. It was amazing of Owen to give up his time and join me. If you have any ideas for future guests, please, again, let me know via the usual channels. All of which just leaves me to say, finally, that I've been Mark Rees. This has been my Ghosts and Folklore podcast, beaming live from Wales to the world. It's the best, it's the beautiful, it's the only Ghosts and Folklore from Wales podcast, and a special prize to the first person who can tell me what film I nicked that quote from. And, well, actually, what I should say is, it's the best, it's the beautiful, it's the only Ghosts and Folklore from Wales podcast. And it's the only podcast, I imagine, that ends with such terrible, heavy breathing. No star.